Hello everyone, welcome back. Today I wanted to talk about another group of, aquatic beetles. Not the Diticids, which I like talking about the most, but these are the Gyrinids, or the Whirligig Beetles. And this is a research article that was published in April 2024 coming out of Japan at Kobe University by Shinji Sugiura and Masakazu Hayashi, who both are pretty prolific authors. They have a lot of articles in their names. And this article is about whirligig beetles, which I will explain what those are in a minute if you're not familiar with them. And specifically their chemical defenses against invasive frogs compared to the native species of frogs. So for those of you who are not familiar, Japan has an issue with the American bullfrog. So this is the American bullfrog. These were introduced in the early 1900s as a meat source, and then they escaped containment, and now all of the major islands of Japan are infested, and they're a major problem. They can grow very, very large, and they are voracious predators in the aquatic environment. And they wanted to compare how well the native species of Gyrinids did compared to the invasive frog and or comparing the invasive frog with the native frog. So this is the black spotted frog, and this is a native kind of bullfrog for Japan. And their hypothesis was, and it's not a shocking hypothesis, is that the native beetles would have better defenses against the native species, which they evolved with, compared to the invasive species. But they wanted to actually document how well these whirligig beetles did. And so they published this article. It's a very elegant article. It's a very simple article. It's directly to the point. It's not, crazy statistical methods and all this other stuff. They literally took frogs and they took beetles and they watched how they interact and documented it. So it's quite to the point, which is nice. So these are Gyrinids. These are the whirligig beetles. And these are aquatic beetles that you can pretty much find anywhere. There's not a ton of species of them worldwide. There's only about 700 species. But if you go to any pond or river or lake, you will probably find these in the calmer waters. They tend to hang out in groups. They're not very large. This is maybe, half an inch at most. The ones I've collected are generally not very large. They tend to either be like a silver gray or a bronze or brassy color. And they just kind of float around. They're covered with a thick wax layer, which helps them repel water, and they generally just float along on the surface. But if you disturb the water, if you're a predator or you're trying to get out there to catch them with your net or whatever, they start spiraling psychotically. And this is where their names come from, the whirligig beetles. And this is one of their major namesake defenses, is that they start this crazy spiraling in order to evade the predators. They can also dive. They are diving beetles, and they can also take off into the air. So they have a lot of behavioral, physical defenses against predation. But they also have, which I didn't realize this, they also have a series of chemical defenses, which is what this paper is mostly interested in and reporting on. And if we go to a bigger picture, this is what they look like up close. On this tail end here, their final segment here, this is called the pygidium. It's not really a segment, it's kind of a pseudo segment. And they have a pair of glands on the back end of them that secrete a bunch of terrible compounds to entice predators to leave them alone, let's say. So some of the compounds stink, some of the compounds taste bad, and they can cover themselves with it. They can also secrete it directly into the mouth of the predator so that the predator will either avoid them when they smell it, or once they taste it, they regurgitate them. So it's a pretty neat little trick. So other things about the Gyrinids that's really cool, they have these little nubbin antennae, the tiny, tiny little antennae that are kind of like balls that they can tuck away, so they are very streamlined to get around the water. Their middle and hind legs are flattened. They're wide, flattened, and hairy, and they use them as little oars to get through the water really fast. And then they have these really big, long front legs because they're predators. The Gyrinids are all predators, and they can lash these raptorial legs out and grab whatever is in front of them in order to eat them. So I'm a big proponent of doing drawings. This is a photograph, but this is what it looks like in drawing form. And you can really see all of the characteristics. These flattened legs that are really hairy for swimming around. very, very streamlined, nubbin little antennae, long raptorial forelegs. And what's really cool about them is that here's their eye and here is their eye. They have 4 eyes, basically. And how this works is the water layer runs down the midline of the body and they float along it. So they have an eye under the water and they have an eye above the water. And they have this on both sides. So it's really like they have 4 eyes. And this is one of the genera that was used in this study. This is Denudis. So you can see it's kind of a brassy color. So they have eyes on top here and eyes on bottom. And this is kind of what they're entomologically famous for, being able to see what's above them and below them at the same time. What likely happened is that they had just a set of really big eyes and then cuticle grew in the middle, kind of splitting them, but it's still one giant eye, basically, instead of 4 eyes growing separately. Anyway, so these researchers were interested not in the physical defenses, where they can see a lot and they move crazily around, but they were more interested in what are the chemical defenses. What are the pygidial glands doing that can benefit them versus the native predators or the invasive predators? So, as you would kind of expect, their hypothesis was that because these beetles evolved with the native black-spotted frog, that they would have better defenses against them versus the invasive, which they've only been around for about 100 years. They haven't had enough time, theoretically, to develop a hardy defense. So this is very, very simple. Their methods were very direct, which is honestly kind of nice. They collected a bunch of these beetles. They collected a bunch of post-metamorphic, not sexually mature yet adult frogs, and starved the frogs for a while, 24 hours, and then introduced them to the beetles and saw if the frogs would eat the beetles or if they would regurgitate them or avoid them. And what was going on. So it was very, very to the point. They had 30 of each beetle. They had a bunch of these frogs, and they did 15 replications in each combination. So it really worked out really well. And what they found was exactly what you would expect, and it's not good news, which is that the native frogs, the Pelophylax here, rejected the beetles about 40% of the time, only consumed them 60% of the time. So pink and black is either they ignored them or reject them. Rejection is basically they attacked them and either withdrew before they got them to the mouth, or they actually got the beetle into their mouth, tasted whatever these compounds were, and then regurgitated them because it's disgusting. And then the invasive American bullfrog did not care. They would just consume whatever. The defenses had no effect, or the chemical defenses had no effect on the American bullfrog. We don't know about physical defenses, the movement defenses, because we haven't actually examined that. These researchers did not, in fact, build a big aquatic tank or whatever to examine the physical defenses. These are just the chemical defenses, close proximity defenses, basically. And it's bad news. So this is probably the best picture. So this is the black-spotted frog. It actually consumed the beetle, like you would see here, and then immediately tasted these compounds and just had to spit it back out. This needs to be my wallpaper, basically. Can't stand the compounds. The bullfrogs were not affected at all, so this is terrible news. But it is what you expect because there is no evolutionary history really between these American bullfrogs and these Japanese Gyrinids. And why this is important is because generally government policy in the U.S. is we don't really care about predaceous animals. And generally speaking, because when it comes to invasive species, we generally talk about economic impacts, agricultural impacts. There's not a ton of focus on just environmental impacts or ecosystem impacts because there's no money in ecosystem impacts. We only really care about how this is affecting the bottom line. So when you get a predator coming across the borders and establishing itself in some environment, it's only when they start disrupting huge-scale environmental systems or when they actually get over into economic systems that we actually care. So government policies, basically, we don't care about invasive predators. And that's true for a lot of countries. But once they get in there, they start causing a lot of disruptions to the ecosystems, because there's no balance there. Like the prey animals have no way of dealing with these predators. And this is true even in the wild caught frogs that they had. You can take a frog, cut them open, and look at the stomach contents because they swallow their prey whole, and you can see what they've been eating. The American bullfrogs eat gyrinids all the time, and the natives tend to avoid them because of all of their defenses, so you don't find them in their stomachs. So this is a major issue that we need to keep in mind when we talk about invasive species. This article, though, is open access, so I will link to the article so you can read it if you want. It's a very short article, lots of pictures, lots of graphs. The methods aren't crazy. It's if you're worried about, oh, I won't understand what's going on, this is a very to the point sort of article. It's kind of nice that way. But I'll link it in the description. Like and subscribe, it helps me out a lot, and I'll talk to you guys later.